The moon with no name. Before we had gods, we had the moon. Before we had stories, we had its light. And long before we had words to speak or aloud, we simply looked up. Take a breath. Let your lungs fill with air that has travelled across time. Now close your eyes not to sleep, but to remember something you never lived. Picture a world with no cities, no names, no stars with stories attached. Just sky, just dark. And then a pale circle rising above the trees, cold and slow. No one had a name for it. No one needed one. It was just there, enormous, silent, haunting, the first mirror in the sky. Imagine a time before time, a savannah brushed by night winds. Somewhere a child, not yet human in the way we are now, looks up for the very first time. Perhaps their parents are asleep. Perhaps a lion growls in the distance. But in that moment, they're not watching the grass. They're not watching the fire. They're watching something ancient and glowing and distant. And something stirs inside them. Something we still carry. Wonder. Because before the wheel, before writing, before the hunt and the harvest, there was this. The act of seeing the moon and feeling something we didn't have words for. That was the beginning of us. You see, the moon has always been with us, but we haven't always noticed her. For millions of years our ancestors crawled, climbed and fought under the same sky, too busy surviving to be astonished. But then something changed. A shift in consciousness, a spark in the mind, and suddenly the sky wasn't just background. It became theatre. The moon became the first light show, and the mind began to watch. Homo erectus likely saw it blank eyes catching silver reflections in watering holes. Neanderthals too paused in frozen forests, the moon casting shadows behind their massive forms. But it wasn't until the rise of Homo sapiensis that the moon transformed from light into meaning. She was always changing, always slipping between shapes. A silver coin, a perfect circle, then a torn shard and finally gone. And yet she always returned. Imagine what that must have felt like, to lose the only light in the sky, and then, days later, see it reborn. That rhythm, that dance, it became a pulse in our souls. Before we tracked time with numbers, we counted with her. The moon wasn't just there, she was watching. And we began to watch back. But in the beginning she had no name, no Selena, no Chandra, no Tsukuyomi. She didn't belong to any culture because there were no cultures, only clusters of early people huddled around fire, listening to silence, watching the sky. Imagine the first time one of them pointed upward. No language, just a sound, a gesture, a grunt of recognition. The beginning of shared wonder. That pointing finger, that was the first question ever asked not in words, but in wonder. And that question has never been fully answered. What is that? That act of looking up and asking was the first crack in the wall between instinct and imagination. And through that crack, we walked into what we now call humanity. The moon became a kind of clock before there were hours. Her cycles told us when to hunt, when to move, when to bleed. Women's bodies began to echo her rhythm. Men began to measure their strength by her light. Babies were born under her gaze. The dying breathed their last by her pale glow. And all of us, every ancestor you've ever had, once knew her by heart, even without a name. She was there at every turning point. When we made fire, she watched the sparks rise. When we painted our first stories on cave walls, she crept in through cracks in the stone. When the first lullabies were hummed, they were sung under her quiet approval. She saw the first kiss, the first fear, the first betrayal. She was the sky's only eye in a time before the stars had meaning, and she never blinked. That's what makes her different. The sun may give life, but it blinds. The stars are beautiful, but too many to hold. The moon is singular. She's reachable. She's always in motion and yet always returns. She became a symbol before we understood symbols, companion for the night, a silent witness to our evolution. We didn't choose the moon, she chose us, or maybe it was mutual. And now, thousands of generations later, you still feel it, that twinge in the chest when you see a full moon rising over the horizon, that strange sadness in a crescent sky, that ancient longing in a blue-lit night. Science tells us that the moon was born in fire, a cosmic collision, Earth and a rogue planet slamming into each other 4 billion years ago. The result? A glowing scar in the sky, a wound that never healed but softened into beauty. But long before science, we knew none of this, and yet somehow we knew. We felt the moon was old. We felt she had power. We told stories that she was a god, a goddess, a warrior, a protector, a trickster, a twin. We made myths not because we were ignorant, but because we were hungry for meaning, and what better canvas than the face in the sky? The moon has no voice, but she inspired our first words. The moon has no hands, but she helped shape our tools. The moon has no heart, but she helped awaken ours. She's always been there above the blood, the stone, the fire, the song, through every extinction, every migration, every whisper in the dark. So tonight, when you look up, remember this. You're not alone in your wonder. You're part of a long, unbroken line of moon watchers, from a child in the grasslands with no name to a scientist peering through a telescope, to you. We're all children of the moon's gaze. And though she has 1,000 names now, there was a time before all language when she was simply the light that returned. And in that return, we became human. Firelight and moon shadow. It began with flickers. Not in the sky, but on the ground, a spark, a crackle, a fragile flame held in trembling hands. The first fire was not a tool. It was a god. It danced. It devoured. It protected and punished. It whispered in tongues no one could yet understand. But it was never alone. Because while fire ruled the center of the circle, the moon ruled its edge. Step outside the firelight, and there she was, above, watching, always just beyond the reach of the flames, casting long silver shadows of bodies huddled close together, eyes gleaming with a new kind of fear or something deeper, something that had no name. Wonder. This is the story of the first nights we noticed both. The year is meaningless. The calendar hasn't been invented, but the night is real. Cold winds cut across a steppe in Ice Age Europe. A group of Homo sapiens crouch near the warmth, their silhouettes trembling like ghosts on a cave wall. Across a distant hill, unseen by them, another group sits by their own fire, stockier, broader, Neanderthals. Same night, same moon, 2 kinds of human, 1 companion above. She doesn't take sides. She simply reflects not just light, but something more profound. She becomes a mirror for thought. For the first time, minds look up and wonder, what is that? They don't say it. There are no words for that yet, but they feel it. And that is the beginning of consciousness. The moon and fire. The 2 lights of the ancient world shaped us in different ways. Fire belonged to us. We fed it, tended it, learned to carry it from place to place. It was ours. But the moon was not ours. It could not be owned or held. It arrived on its own schedule, changed without warning, vanished for days, and always came back. That cycle became a rhythm, and that rhythm became the first pattern our minds ever held. Look at the way the moonlight hits the stone beside a sleeping child. It paints shapes. It creates shadows. It makes the familiar strange, the safe eerie, the ordinary sacred. What do you do when the darkness is not total, when something half-seen moves in the trees? You imagine. That's where dreams are born. Scientists say both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals had the brain structures for imagination. Both groups made tools, both buried their dead, both lived under the same sky. But one of them would come to see the moon not just as a presence, but as a being. The Neanderthals saw it. Make no mistake, fossils tell us their eyes were larger than ours. Their vision may have been better in low light. Perhaps they were more comfortable in moonlit nights than we were. But something was different in how we responded. Because Homo sapiens didn't just see the moon, we saw into it. We began to build stories. Imagine a child crawling from the firelight one night, following the shape of their own shadow as it stretches out before them. They look up. The moon is full, impossibly large, hanging like a spirit in the sky. They don't have a word for beautiful, but they feel it, that quiet ache in the chest. The one you still feel, even now, thousands of generations later, when the moon rises over a dark horizon and your thoughts suddenly go still. That feeling, that's one of the oldest things you carry. The moon shaped our nights, but fire shaped our minds. Around the fire, faces glowed orange and eyes reflected back stories we didn't know how to tell yet. The fire was the first stage. The moon was the first spotlight. Every night became a performance of survival, of memory, of myth. Around the flames we rehearsed fear and triumph. In the moonlight we remembered, and the moon remembered us. You see, it's easy to think that consciousness came all at once, that we simply became human, like a switch turning on. But it wasn't a switch. It was a slow burn, a flicker becoming a flame. The moon watched it happen. She saw the first laughter, the first dance, the first gesture that meant, "I love you," or "Don't go," or "The spirits are near." She saw both Homo sapiens and Neanderthal rise from beasts to beings, and then she watched one of them disappear. Not in war, not in fire, but in silence. And here's the strangest part: even after the Neanderthals were gone, they remained. Their blood still flows through ours. Their DNA still whispers in our cells, which means that when we look at the moon now, they do too from within us. Their eyes once traced the same glowing arc across the sky. Their children were born under her glow. They feared her, they worshipped her, and now, in us, they remember her. So next time you sit beside a fire or a glowing screen and glance out at that cold light rising in the east, know this: you are not alone. The moon has never belonged to any one species, any one tribe, any one belief. She has watched lions hunt and lovers meet. She has seen death, birth, betrayal, and song. She saw the first spark. She sees the last screen. She watched us become human, and she never looked away. She's not light, she's reflected light. Which means that every time you see her, you're also seeing the sun and the earth and yourself. But more than that, you're seeing them. The fire makers, the tool shapers, the shadow chasers, the ones who crouched by ancient flames and looked up with eyes not so different from your own. The moon was their first mystery, and in many ways she's still ours. Savannah Moon. Before there were maps, before there were stars with names, before there was even fear that had a word for itself, there was the moon. And on the open savannah, where shadows were predators and tall grass whispered threats, the moon was not just beautiful, it was necessary. She was the difference between death in the dark and life by light. Imagine this: 200,000 years ago, the Pleistocene world, not yet tamed, not yet carved into borders or cities. Vast open land, Africa under its primal sky, a herd of antelope in the distance, a lion crouched in the brush, and scattered across this wild landscape small, fragile bands of humans, barely more than upright apes with sharpened sticks and a growing hunger for more than just meat. A hunger for tomorrow, because tomorrow was not guaranteed. Night was the great divider. When the sun fell and shadows grew, the savannah changed. No longer a hunting ground, it became a killing field, and humans were not kings of it. They were prey. But once a month, the rules shifted. When the moon was full, so full it painted the grass silver, so bright it turned predators into silhouettes that was a window, a moment of borrowed power, a night when the hunted could become the hunters, or at least survive. We call it the full moon. They didn't have a word for it, but they knew. They felt it in their bones, the way wolves still howl, the way deer still pause, the way we still stare, even now, when we think we're above it. The moon lit up the danger, but more importantly it lit up the path. Paleolithic humans didn't just endure the night, they used it. They learned to move under moonlight, to slip between trees, to track footprints in silver dust, to signal each other in flashes of reflected light. The moon became their lantern, their compass, their early guide through an unforgiving world. There were no torches yet, no cities, no fires tall enough to chase back the dark. Only the moon. And she gave just enough light to make risk possible. Predator and prey alike changed under her glow. On moonless nights, lions ruled. Their eyes were better suited for the black. They moved without sound, killed without warning, and vanished like ghosts. But on full moon nights, the balance shifted. The prey could see the hunters became shadows, and the hunted could plan. For early humans, this wasn't just poetic, it was strategic. Archaeological evidence from lunar cycle studies shows a striking pattern. More human activity occurred on nights closest to the full moon. More travel, more hunting, more migrations. It wasn't superstition, it was survival. Because in a world without walls, the moon was the wall. She kept the darkness at bay if only for a few nights. And in those windows of safety, human beings began to stretch, to reach, to experiment. They hunted at night, they moved camps, they followed game. They tested the limits of their fear, and sometimes they overcame it. But the moon didn't just protect, she taught. She taught us rhythm. Her cycle became the first regular pattern the human mind could follow. The waxing, the waning, the slow disappearance, the sudden return. In that pattern, we found comfort. We began to predict. And prediction is power. It starts with something simple. A child asks, "Where did the moon go?" And someone answers, "Don't worry, she'll come back." And when she does, the child believes. That belief that's the root of faith, not in gods, but in cycles, in time, in meaning. Under the full moon, humans began to hope. And under the full moon, they began to plan for the first time, not just for tonight, but for tomorrow night. We were still small, still fragile, still losing more battles than we won. But under the moon, we started to walk farther. We started to build memory into the land itself. This hill leads to water. Those trees mark the safe place. Follow the moon until it sets behind the rock shaped like a tooth. No written maps, only landmarks and light. And the moon was the great constant. She was the one thing in the sky that moved in a way we could understand. And so, she became our first guide. Even now, if you strip away the noise, the highways, the lampposts, the screens, and walk into true wilderness, you'll feel it. That pull, that tension, that memory. It's in your skin, in your blood, in your fear of the woods, in your love of moonlit beaches, in your comfort beneath her glow. You may not rely on her anymore, but your ancestors did. And their stories are inside you. That's why people still say things feel different on a full moon. It's not magic, it's memory. A memory so old it predates words. A memory written not in books, but in bone. So next time you step outside and see the full moon rising, pause. And remember the ones who came before you, the ones who lived when the world was still wild, the ones who knew that for a few nights each month they had a gift. A second sun, a mirror in the sky, a brief reprieve from the dark. They called it nothing, but they felt everything, and they survived because of it. And so did you. The night, we noticed. It didn't happen in a flash, not in a blaze of divine revelation, not in thunder or lightning. It happened quietly. One night a set of eyes, ancient, brown, alert, looked up, and instead of seeing the moon as a lamp, they saw a question. And in that moment awe entered evolution. Before that night the moon was background. Helpful, yes. Protective, a kind of silent clock in the sky. But now something shifted. She was no longer just useful. She was strange. She was too smooth, too far, too cold, too present. Why does she change? Why does she follow me? Why does she disappear? Where does she go? These questions weren't asked in words. Words were still being invented, but they were felt. And feeling is where story begins. This is the chapter where we became something more than animals. Not because we invented fire, not because we threw spears or painted our hands on cave walls, but because we began to wonder. The night we noticed the moon, truly noticed her, was the night the human mind stepped out of instinct and into imagination. Somewhere, around a fire that crackled low, a child pointed at the sky, and a parent, perhaps startled, looked too. They had both seen it 1,000 times, but this time they saw it, not just a light, but a riddle. The moon became more than an object. It became a presence. And once you assign presence to something, you assign meaning. You assign story. You assign soul. Evolution gave us bodies. Fire gave us warmth. But awe gave us myths. And the moon became the first myth we ever told. Imagine trying to understand her for the first time. She changes shape, yet always returns to herself. She moves, but never falls. She disappears, but only to come back whole. To early humans, this was not normal. It was magic. And in that magic, our ancestors saw patterned cycle echoes of their own fragile, rhythmic lives. Life and death, blood and birth, the swell of tides, the migration of animals, the flowering of plants. All of it seemed to rise and fall with her breath. They didn't know what gravity was, but they felt it. They didn't have calendars, but they remembered the moon's face. They couldn't measure time in numbers, so they measured it in shadows, and so the moon became a keeper of things, a keeper of memory, a keeper of time, a keeper of mystery. We began to give her names, names she never asked for, names that changed with language, with land, with tribe, but always meant the same thing. She is watching. The Neanderthals noticed her too. Their tools suggest rituals. Their burials suggest reverence. Their eyes, large and adapted to low light, probably saw her more clearly than we ever could. But Homo sapiens, we went further. We didn't just notice her. We reflected ourselves into her. We gave her moods, faces, intentions. She was sometimes a goddess, sometimes a ghost, sometimes an eye, sometimes a mirror. But always she was more than a rock in the sky. She was company. Because here's the truth no science book tells you. The first religion wasn't about heaven. It was about the moon. The first prayers weren't spoken. They were felt in the silence of moonlight, in the hush of a full moon night when even predators paused as if they too were looking up in wonder. Awe is the beginning of all things sacred, and that awe began with her. Every culture that followed Sumerian, Egyptian, Mayan, Chinese, African, Aboriginal had a lunar myth, a lunar calendar, a lunar ritual. She became a symbol of femininity, of fertility, of madness, of rebirth. She ruled the oceans before we even knew they moved because of her. She ruled time before we could count it. She ruled minds before we could explain them. But go back, before the pyramids, before the wheel, before language. Return to that first noticing. A group of early humans sits on a ridge, watching their prey disappear into the long grass, too dark to hunt, too early to sleep. So they wait. And while they wait, they look up. And there she is rising slow and gold from the horizon. And someone feels a flicker, a tremble in the chest. The first spark of what would later be called spirituality, not because they were told to believe, but because they couldn't help it. Because in that moment, the moon didn't just light the night, she inhabited it. And once we noticed her, we could not forget. We carved her into bones, we painted her in ochre on rock walls, we mapped her phases in rows of dots, we watched her rise and fall with aching regularity, and each time she brought with her a reminder that we were part of something larger, stranger, cyclical. The moon gave us mystery, and mystery gave us meaning. And meaning gave us. So the next time you feel something stir when the moon rises behind a cloud, don't dismiss it. That pull you feel, that slow, silent ache, that deep breath as if the world has paused, that's not romance. That's remembrance of a time before time, a night before names, the moment when a creature became a mind because it dared to ask, what is that? And even more terrifying, why does it move me? Welcome to the moment awe entered evolution. Welcome to the night we noticed. The first stories were shadows. Before there was writing, before there were gods, before the first symbol carved in stone, there was the flicker of fire and the glow of the moon. And there between those two lights the first stories were born, not spoken yet, not shaped into words or legends, but felt like wind across the skin, like hunger in the stomach, like awe rising behind the eyes. The first stories were shadows. Imagine a time when the mind was still learning to remember, when history was not a thing you could tell, but a thing you had to feel. The moon rose, the fire crackled, and around that fire sat people, not yet fully human in the modern sense, but no longer just animals. Something in between, something becoming. And as the flames danced, so did the shadows on rocks, on bodies, on the backs of eyelids. And someone watched. Someone noticed. The shadows had shape. They had rhythm. They moved. And in those movements, the first sparks of imagination caught fire. We often think that language made story, but it may have been the opposite. That the need to tell, to show, to explain, to share created language itself. Because what do you do when you see something so beautiful, so terrifying that it fills your chest with trembling? You point. You mimic, you grunt, you gesture, you begin to perform, and someone else watches, and then they perform, and suddenly the first story lives. It may have gone like this. A hunter returns to the group limping, bleeding, alive. In the firelight he shows with his hands how the lion leapt, how he rolled, how the spear struck, and the others watch in silence, in awe. And someone laughs, someone gasps, someone remembers. And the next night they tell it again. But this time they add something, a flourish, a sound, a symbol scratched in the dirt. And so fact becomes memory, and memory becomes meaning. And always above them, the moon watched, casting her soft light over these earliest performances, reflecting silver off painted faces, illuminating the cave walls where flickering figures danced. The moon became the first stage light, and shadows became the first theatre. We like to think we invented storytelling, that it began with Homer or the Vedas or ancient scribes, but it began with silence, with fire, with motion, with moonlight, because under the moon the brain behaves differently. Science tells us melatonin rises, the mind slows, dreams begin to leak into waking thought, and in that in-between state between sleep and alertness, between darkness and glow myth is born. Not just tales of hunts or heroes, but questions. What is death? Where do the animals go? Why does the moon vanish and return? And from those questions, answers. Stories. Not true, but truthful. A woman in the sky chasing her lost child. A wolf devouring the moon. A man cursed to rise and fall forever. Lies, perhaps, but lies that made sense of the night. Because when the dark surrounds you, and the fire burns low, and the moon drifts behind a cloud, your mind fills the void. And the void answers back. Every culture on Earth has stories that begin with the moon. Inuit hunters tell of her as a guide. Australian Aboriginal myths speak of a woman who rose to the heavens. In Mesopotamia, she was Sin, the keeper of time. In Africa, she was the watcher of souls. In China, she held rabbits and immortality. But go back. Go before any of that. Before the names. Before the borders. Before the gods. To a night on the African plains, a circle of early humans, and a sky that stretched farther than they could understand. One among them, perhaps a mother, perhaps a child, lifted a stick into the firelight and cast a shape on the cave wall. A bear, a man, a moon, and another watched and smiled and remembered. And the next night they told it again. But this time it had rhythm, it had form, it had a pattern. And so began not just story but culture, because story is not entertainment. It is identity. It is how we told each other. I saw this. I felt this. I survived this. And most importantly, you are not alone. And the moon slant round, Silver was always there. She became the audience, the first listener, the one who never interrupted, never judged, never forgot. She became the keeper of stories, the backdrop of our becoming. And we became storytellers. Because we had to. Because memory was fragile. Because children needed to know what the lion looked like. Because lovers needed to remember what the other said under the full moon by the fire. Because grief needed form. Because love needed voice. And because silence was too heavy. The first stories were not written. They were embodied, danced, sung, cried. They were passed from mouth to mouth, heart to heart, shadow to shadow. And in every one of them, the moon was watching. So when people say the moon is romantic, they are half right. But it's not because she looks beautiful in a poem. It's because she is the poem. She's the oldest character in every story. The one who was always there. The one who never left. The one who reminds us that meaning can come from silence. And that the flicker of fire on a cave wall is not the beginning of the story. It is the story. And that story is you. The changing face above. It began with noticing again. Because that is how evolution became imagination through noticing. The moon changed. Not just once, not randomly, but regularly. A sliver, a half, a swollen pearl, then gone, then, miraculously, back again. The first minds that watched her did not have language, but they had pattern. And pattern was everything. For animals, pattern meant survival. For humans, pattern became meaning. And no pattern was more mesmerizing, more quietly powerful than the changing face above. The moon did not simply rise and fall. She waxed. She waned. She disappeared. She was reborn. She followed a rhythm more ancient than words, more primal than numbers, more reliable than stars. And those who noticed, they began to count, not with sticks, not with stones, but with memory. Memory etched in bone, in rhythm, in ritual. A woman noticed the moon's phases matched the rhythm of her body. Blood with the full moon, fertility with the dark. A hunter noticed that prey moved differently on bright nights than dark ones. A child counted sleeps between full moons and realized it was the same each time. And so, before there were clocks, before there were kings, before there were names, there was the calendar of the moon. Look again at the artifacts buried in the world's oldest caves. The carved antler from Abry Blanchard in France, 32,000 years old, a row of dots, each one deliberate. The Lobombo bone from Africa, older still, 29 notches carved into baboon fibula. To some, these are just scratches, but to others they are lunar counts, menstrual cycles, phases of the sky, time itself captured in repetition. The moon became the first clock, the first mirror of time, the first teacher of patience, of return, of eternal return. She taught us to wait, to hope, to know that darkness was never final, because she always came back. And so the earliest minds began to trust her. She was dependable in a world of chaos. While storms raged and beasts hunted and death lurked around every corner, the moon kept showing up. Different face, same rhythm. Like breath, like heartbeat, like grief that eases then returns. The changing moon became more than light. She became time itself, and that changed everything. Because to mark time is to remember. To remember is to build history, and history is what makes humans human. Before the moon, life was now. Just now. Hunger, danger, sleep, instinct. But with her, there was before and after. There was 2 moons ago. There will be food by the next full moon. She died when the moon was thin. Memory was born from her rhythm, so was planning. And once you can plan, you can build, you can farm, you can settle, you can write. All of its civilization itself rests on this one, quiet truth. Humans learn time by watching the moon. Even now, thousands of years later, traces of this old wisdom remain. We still speak of months, from months we still feel cycles. We still feel something stir on full moon nights. Science may explain the moon's pull, but it cannot erase it. Because it is older than science. It is carved into our genes, into the sleep of wolves, into the tides of our blood. In ancient Sumer, priests stood atop ziggurats, tracking the moon's face each night to guide planting and prayer. In Egypt, the moon was Thoth, keeper of time and wisdom. Even the great solar pharaohs respected the moon's calendar. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built entire cities aligned to lunar eclipses and solstices. The moon was the scribe of the sky, recording every breath of the earth. But those were just evolutions of something far more ancient, a mother beside a fire, drawing crescents in the dirt with a stick. So much meaning from a face in the sky. And the face kept changing. From silver sickle to golden coin to nothing, then back again. The first drama in the heavens. The first story we could see repeat. The moon became the story of us. Birth, growth, fullness, death, rebirth. Every phase a metaphor, every cycle a prophecy. And every child born into her rhythm knew that time was not a line but a circle. That's what the moon taught us, that things return, that life flows in waves, that nothing, not even death, is final, because the moon always comes back. So we carved her face into stone. We aligned tombs to her rise. We sang songs when she vanished. We rejoiced when she reappeared. She wasn't just a moon anymore. She was memory incarnate, and in remembering her, we remembered ourselves. That's what time is after all, a mirror, a rhythm, a face that changes but never disappears. And high above us, night after night, she reminded us of something vital. That change is not the end, it's just the pattern. And so beneath her pale glow we became pattern seekers, timekeepers, myth makers. The moon became our first teacher, our first calendar, our first muse, and her face, ever-changing, still looks down, marking time for creatures still learning how to live inside it. Moonblood and motherhood. Before temples, before gods had names, before man carved lines into stone to measure the sky, there was the moon, and there was the woman, and the two were one. Somewhere in the deep past, long before written history, a woman bled not from wound, not from battle, but from life itself. And someone noticed that her bleeding came not from pain, but from pattern. Not all the time, not random, but with the moon, 28 nights, from sliver to fullness, from fullness to dark. As the moon vanished, she bled. As it grew, so did her strength. As it glowed full, so did her womb. And so began one of humanity's earliest truths. The moon is the mother of time and the mirror of woman. In the firelit nights of the Paleolithic, before astronomy, before clocks, the most sacred calendar was written in blood, not on stone, but within the body. The cycle of bleeding, the pause, the potential, the birth, the beginning again. And just like the moon, the woman changed. From girl to mother, from mother to elder, from elder to ancestor. And through her life flowed, not in machines, not in cities, but in the quiet, rhythmic, cosmic pulsing of flesh and sky. They called her sacred. They had no other word. They carved her into ivory figurines, broad hips, heavy breasts full-bellied with potential. Venus of Willendorf, mother of the moon, a goddess before gods, a rhythm before logic, a presence before time. She was the blood of the earth, and the moon was her witness. In those first human gatherings, the women knew something the men did not. They knew that the moon and their wombs spoke the same language. They knew that the tide within them matched the tide of the sky. And so they sat in circles when the blood came. Not in shame, not in exile, but in reverence. A moment to pause, to rest, to dream. These were the moonblood rites older than language, older than kings, older than myth. And in those days to bleed was not a curse. It was the rhythm of the world itself flowing through your body. The men watched, confused, awed. They had no rhythm like this, no cycle they could feel inside, no mirror in the heavens that moved in sync with their flesh. And so they built, they carved, they conquered. They made war to feel powerful, but women bled without dying and gave birth to new life with screams and strength no man could match. The moon watched it all, full and silent. And with every cycle she whispered to those who listened, "You are not broken, you are not impure, you are time itself, you are life incarnate." Even today, science confirms what myth already knew. Most human menstrual cycles average 28 to 29.5 days. The moon's full cycle, 29.5 days. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it's a memory, a biological echo of a time when we were closer to the earth, to the sky, to ourselves. In the earliest matrilineal societies, the moon was not distant. She was not object. She was presence. She governed planting and bleeding, fertility and death, mothers and crops. Time itself was lunar, the moonth not the month, and through her, women guided the tribe. They watched her face. They felt their own bodies, and they knew when to sow, when to sing, when to sleep, when to give birth. Because the moon was the first midwife. Her light guided births. Her rhythm-shaped ceremonies. Her dark phases offered rest. Her return offered hope. And women, bathed in her silver glow, became the keepers of mystery. Not because they were magical, but because they were in sync with something greater. And so the moon was never just a light in the sky. She was a cycle woven into the flesh of every woman, every daughter, every grandmother. And when the bleeding stopped, when menopause came, that was not the end. It was elevation. The crones, the elders, the wise women, they no longer cycled with the moon because they had become the moon, constant, observant, beyond tides, above storms, the full moon in the tribe. But the world would forget. Patriarchy rose, cities grew, suns replaced moons, and women's blood, once sacred, became something to hide, to fear, to mock. The moon, once a guide, was recast as a witch's curse, a lunatic's symbol, a thing to be feared in the dark. But under all that forgetting, the truth still pulsed, in the quiet, in the dark, in the secret knowing passed from mother to daughter, and the moon, still unchanged, watched from above, waiting. Because even now, even with streetlights and pills and sterilized silence, women still bleed with her. Not all, not always, but enough to know we never fully broke that bond. The moon still calls, she still sings her rhythm, and those who bleed or once bleed all came from the blood of those who did still carry her inside. In bone, in pulse, in womb, in memory. This is not metaphor, it is biology, it is myth, it is truth. It is the story of how we counted time before counting. It is the story of how we honoured life before death had meaning. It is the story of how the moon and the mother were never separate. They were two names for the same rhythm. So, when you look up on a full moon night, remember, you are looking at the world's oldest calendar, the first clock, the womb of myth, the mirror of woman, and she is still watching, the first moon gods, long before pyramids rose, before ink met papyrus, before thunder had a name, there was the moon. And we looked up, night after night, and wondered, not just at her light, but at her face, her shape, her moods. And slowly, inevitably, we gave her personality. Because what we could not name, we gave form, and what we could not understand, we made into God. So began the oldest religion, the worship of the sky. But not of the sun, not yet. The sun was too bright, too blinding, too cruel in its clarity. The moon was different. She was subtle. She kept secrets. She revealed herself in phases, like a story unfolding across the nights. She did not burn. She bathed. She watched. And in that long watch we saw divinity. The first moon gods had no names, just whispers, just symbols scratched on stone and painted on cave walls. They were not kings. They were not men. The first moon gods were goddesses. Not because women ruled, but because life pulsed through them in the same rhythm as the moon. Across the fertile savannas of ancient Africa, the moon was mother, mistress of tides, keeper of cycles. In the dark forests, she was the hunter, the glowing eye stalking prey while the world slept. In the vast deserts, she was the cool balm against a burning day. And in every land, from the Ganges to the Nile, from the steppes to the savannah, the moon had power. Soft power, slow power, but irresistible. And so we carved her. Fat-bellied figurines, faces surrounded by crescents, eyes wide open, watching. She watched births, she watched deaths, she watched seasons, she watched the becoming of humanity, and we in return watched her, because she came when we needed her most in darkness. She was the first light that was not fire, and she asked nothing only that we notice. The first shamans whispered her name in languages now lost. They danced during her full light. They mourned when she vanished. They marked her cycles in ochre and ash. In the caves of Lascaux, among mammoths and horses, we find a horned figure beside a crescenta moon goddess, perhaps older than civilization itself. In the Blombos caves of South Africa, red ochre patterns mirror lunar notations. We were watching her even then, She was our first mirror in the sky. To early people, the moon was not just beautiful, she was useful. She warned of high tides, she governed when to plant and when to reap. She dictated migration patterns, she ruled the womb. So we made her divine. We gave her many names, but the soul was the same. In Mesopotamia, long before Babylon, Nana the moon god reigned. He rode a crescent-shaped boat across the night sky, charting the heavens like a scribe. His wife Ningal was the lady of dreams and reeds, a symbol of harvest and prophecy. But even here, though Nana bore the crown, the moon's memory was female. His form was masculine, but his rhythm was not. In Africa, the Dogon people spoke of the moon as Nomo, an ancestral spirit, half man, half fish, who brought order and rhythm to chaos. He bled water, not blood, and his breath brought the tides. The moon, in this telling, was a breathing being alive, pulsing, dragging the ocean in and out like a cosmic lung. In India, the moon became Chandra, a god of dew and tenderness. His light was nourishing. He brought dreams. He carried the nectar of immortality in a silver cup. And yet, even here, the moon was associated with the mind with softness, with fertility. His wives were the 27 nakshatras, the lunar constellations symbolizing the days of the moon cycle. A god, yes, but one always surrounded by women. In China, the moon was Chang's goddess who drank the elixir of life and floated to the heavens. She lives on the moon still, according to legend, with her white rabbit, mixing immortality in a silent palace of frost. Her husband, Hu Yi, an archer who shot down suns, could not follow her. So every year on the harvest moon, people light lanterns to guide him to her. A love story, a tragedy, a moon that holds the ache of longing. In Japan, Tsukuyomi is the moon, deity cold, elegant, silent. He offended the sun goddess, Amaterasu, and so they live apart day and night, forever chasing each other. A divine divorce etched into the sky. And thus, even in East Asia, the moon is a god of loneliness. The patterns repeat. In Mesoamerica, the Maya saw the moon as a rabbit. The Aztecs saw her as Coyolxauhqui, a dismembered goddess whose body became the moon after her brother Huitzilopochtli tore her apart. Violence, beauty, memory. Across the globe, before the spread of empire, before the sword became sacred, the moon was honoured as something older than power. She was the watcher, not judge, not ruler, just presence. That, in the end, is what the earliest humans needed most. Not salvation, not wrath, not favour. Just something watching as they made fire, as they gave birth, as they buried their dead, as they stared into the darkness hoping it would stare back. And so, the moon became God not because she demanded worship, but because we needed witness. We needed the comfort of her silence, the rhythm of her change, the patience of her return. And she gave us all of it, without command, without temple, without priest, just presence. In that presence we built the first myths, not of conquest, but of cycles, of bleeding and birthing, of losing and returning, of light vanishing, then returning every time. And every myth, no matter where it was born, carried the same truth. The moon is not just above us, she is in us. She is the calendar in our cells, the tide in our blood, the rhythm in our dreams. We still see her, on jewellery, on flags, on gravestones. We still know her, even if we forget we know. Because she was our first god, not of war, not of judgment, but of mystery. The god of night who never spoke but always returned. Eclipses and fear. Before science, before telescopes, before anyone knew what shadow was, the moon vanished. Not slowly, like her monthly fading, not gently, like the passing of a cloud, but suddenly. One moment she was there, full, luminous, a silver eye keeping watch over hunters, mothers, sleeping children. And the next she was being eaten. The fire crackled, the elders froze, the animals went still. A hush fell over the earth, not of peace, but of panic because something was wrong in the sky. The moon, the eternal moon, the one who always returned, the one who guided tides and time and wombs, was disappearing. And no one knew why. A copper haze bled across her face, then darkness took her entirely. She didn't fade like before. She didn't retreat to her cave of night to return in a few days. She was stolen, swallowed, and the world, without understanding shadow, without knowing celestial geometry, felt the ancient chill of helplessness. The sky had turned on us. Imagine it. You are a child watching your parents who always had answers, now trembling, whispering, clutching charms, lighting frantic fires, beating drums to wake her. Because this was no ordinary night. This was a night when the moon was under attack. In every tribe, in every early culture, they found a name for the terror that consumed her. Some said it was a wolf, a god's punishment, a great dragon in the heavens. In China, they called it the celestial dog, snapping at the moon with glowing fangs. So they banged pots, lit fires, fired arrows into the sky as if noise and fire could frighten a cosmic beast. In India they spoke of Rahu, a demon with no body, just a floating hungry head. Banished by the gods, Rahu sought revenge by swallowing the moon whole. But his punishment was incomplete. He could never hold her. So after moments of horror, the moon always reappeared, slipping from Rahu's mouth like a pearl reborn. In the Americas, the Incas believed a jaguar had climbed into the sky. It bit into the moon, leaving it blood red. So they shouted, threw spears at the air, cried to the ancestors to chase the beast back into the void. Because to lose the moon was to lose rhythm. To lose rhythm was to lose everything. And in Africa, in the ancient heartlands, the stories varied, but the fear was the same. Some believed the moon was fighting with the sun. Others that a great spirit had turned away in grief. Still others saw it as a test. Would the people remember her? Would they call her back? Would they show her she mattered? So they sang. And for the first time in human memory they made ritual. This was the birth of ceremony under fear, not just for harvests, not just for gods, but to calm the sky, to restore what was broken in the heavens. Because the moon was not just a light, she was order. And when she disappeared, even for minutes, even behind Earth's own shadow, the illusion of safety shattered. The earliest eclipses weren't astronomical events. They were cosmic betrayals. We hadn't yet learned that we orbit a star and that the moon orbits us. We hadn't yet understood that the Earth casts a shadow larger than any forest fire, any predator, any fear. So, when that shadow took hair, it felt personal. And when she re-emerged, as if forgiven, as if reborn, we didn't cheer, not at first. We wept, in awe, in gratitude, in a strange kind of shame for doubting her, for needing her so much, for believing we'd lost her to a beast in the sky we could not fight. Eclipses reminded us we were fragile, that even the most eternal-seeming things could vanish. And so, to prepare, we began to build rituals. In Babylon, eclipses were omens, kings would hide, a substitute would sit on the throne waiting to absorb the wrath of whatever gods had cast the sky into blood. Because the moon didn't just light the night, she governed fate. And when she was bruised, so was the kingdom. In the Arctic North, the Inuit believed the moon was a man, and during an eclipse, he visited his sister, the sun. Their reunion, brief, intimate, forbidden. So when the moon dimmed, it wasn't fear, it was reverence. a sacred moment when the siblings crossed paths and the world held its breath. But in most places, eclipse meant danger. And over time, the fear shaped power. Shamans who could predict eclipses became priests. Priests became astronomers, and astronomy became the language of kings. Because those who could map the moon's vanishings could also control the people's panic. "Do not fear," they'd say. "It will pass." And when it did, they were hailed as divine. But the oldest response, the first, purest response, was human. Fear. Not irrational, not ignorant. Just instinct. Because we had built our world on the idea that some things would always be there, and when the moon went dark, so did that illusion. And yet, always she returned, faded back into silver, wore her full face once more, watched over our fires like nothing had happened. But we had changed, a little more wary, a little more reverent, a little more aware that we're not in control. Not of the sky, not of the gods, not even of the rhythm we pretend to master. So, we wrote stories, we built chants, we made masks and painted stones, and timed our dreams to her return. And in doing so, we began to shape what would one day be called religion, not to control the moon, but to survive her absence. Because eclipses taught us that light is not promised, that rhythm is not guaranteed, that even the moon or silent witness can disappear, but also that she comes back, that shadow passes, that fear can be survived, that chaos can be understood. And in the end, eclipses gave us more than fear. They gave us the seed of our first great truth. To face darkness with ritual is to begin the journey of becoming human. Lunar landscapes in art. Before the pen, before the stylus, before ink and alphabet, there was charcoal, and fire, and ash, and walls that whispered. Somewhere deep in the earth beneath hills and forests and forgotten time, a child dipped her fingers into ochre. She pressed her hand to stone. She made a mark. And above her, perhaps outside, perhaps just beyond the cave's cold ceiling, hung the moon, watching. We call them cave paintings, but they were more than that. They were memory, they were ritual, they were the first attempts to hold time still. And in those dark cathedrals of stone beside bison and antelope, beside spirals and stars, there was sometimes a circle, a crescent, a repeating arc, a glowing disk with rays. Was that the sun? Perhaps. But what if it was the moon? We look at these marks now, with science, with analysis, with eager certainty. But the truth is more primal. We don't know. But we feel. We feel the hush in the room, the sacredness of shadow and curve, the way the animals move in rhythm as if guided by more than hunger. We feel the moon in those paintings even when we cannot name her, because she was always there. In the Chauvet Cave of France, 32,000 years old, horses run in a circle, the hooves blurred in motion. Some say they mimic the hunt, others say they mimic time. And between the galloping form small dots grouped in clusters. One cluster is 30 dots, aligned, methodical, not random. Some believe it's a lunar calendar. A count of nights from new moon to new moon. A visual memory of the sky's rhythm. The moon rendered in stone and pigment. In La Pasiega, Spain, beside a deer with impossibly large eyes, a strange pattern repeats. A crescent, a halo, a shape that doesn't belong to any animal. Some archaeologists call it symbolic, others hesitate. But the ancients weren't drawing for museums, they were drawing to remember, to honour, to guide. And if the moon ruled their nights, wouldn't they try to hold her too, and not just on cave walls? They carved the moon into bones, they etched her onto antlers, they shaped her in stone amulets worn close to the chest. In Germany, the 32,000-year-old lion man may not show the moon herself, but he stands in the flickering firelight of a lunar-watched world. And nearby, in the same layer of earth, a disk marked with notches, perhaps the tally of days. Was someone counting the nights until the moon returned? Was this an early calendar, a necklace of waiting? In Africa, the Ishango bone found near the Nile source bears markings in rows of 29 matching the lunar cycle. This was not art for art's sake. This was lived time scratched into memory. And when you run your fingers along that bone today, you touch the thoughts of a hand that lived 20,000 years ago, a hand that counted the moon, loved her enough to record her. But art wasn't always just counting. Sometimes the moon was story, a backdrop, a character, a face in the dark. In Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories speak of the moon as a man carrying fire across the sky, his face scarred, wise, full of memory. Their rock art shows a glowing orb often above the heads of ancestors, the moon bearing witness to births, to deaths, to dreaming. Not just a sky object, a presence, a god, an elder, a sacred rhythm. In South America, pre-Columbian peoples sculpted dual faces, sun on one side, moon on the other. Balance, cycle, breath. And in India, the Chandraprabh, the moonlight deity, rides a swan under starlight, painted on cave ceilings and temple walls. The moon as coolness, as clarity, as silence that soothes. But it was in Europe nearly 4,000 years ago that the moon was carved into metal. The Nebra sky disk found buried in Germany shows golden stars and a curved arc. A moon! Yes, a crescent, exact, elegant, deliberate. Beside it a full circle, the moon in phase, the moon in motion, the moon caught in bronze. And at the base 2 sweeping arcs, perhaps horizons, perhaps the path of moonrise and set. This was not just art, this was astronomy, wrapped in mysticism. What does it mean that we tried to draw her? Not the sun, blinding and brutal, but the moon, cool, silent, shifting. Maybe we felt seen by her. Maybe we saw ourselves in her waxing and waning. Maybe her change mirrored our own. And so we drew her not to control, but to connect. To say, I remember, I saw you, I waited for your return. And she always came back, even if the drawing faded, even if the stone cracked, even if the cave collapsed, she returned. And when we lit our fires again, she was still watching. Somewhere in a cave now lost, a hand drew a circle, a crescent beside it, maybe a deer beneath, maybe a woman giving birth, a moon above it all, a witness, a companion, a marker. And in that mark we became more than animal, we became artist. Not just to hunt, not just to survive, but to express. To show the sky that we too could shape meaning, that we too could reflect light. Just like her, the moon became muse, the first one, before kings, before temples, before God had a name. There was only this, a hand on a wall, a mark in the dark, and the moon above still watching. Lovers beneath the same moon, before marriage, before language. Before we had names for love or lullaby, we had moonlight silver spilled across savanna and stone, trickling into caves and huts, touching flesh with a tenderness no fire ever gave. Long before gods were carved and poems were sung, 2 hearts would sit together beneath the same sky, not speaking, not needing to, as the moon watched in silence. She was the first to see us touch, the first to catch the glint of tears on the cheek of a woman watching her child sleep, the first to witness fingers reaching for another in the dark. She saw the nervous breath before the first kiss, the solemn glance before the last goodbye, the way 2 bodies curved toward one another like tides pulled by something invisible. She was there when the word love didn't yet exist, only the feeling. Imagine it. A time before clocks, before romance, before even privacy. And yet there is the moon, framing two silhouettes curled beside a fire, leaning together in trust. Not out of instinct alone, but something gentler. The moon did not create love, but she made space for it. A light not bright enough to blind, just enough to linger. In the stillness between predator roars, when even the trees held their breath, came a softer moment. The hum of a lullaby, sung not in words but in rhythm, breath on breath, heartbeat to heartbeat. The moon, hanging above, was a mirror to this peace. In her light we rocked our young, cradled them, coaxed them into sleep with soft sounds, not just survival. This was new. This was evolution, not of bone, but of emotion. The moon, in all her phases, became a symbol for everything we couldn't explain. Why our hearts ached when someone left the circle. Why we waited longer for some to return. Why certain nights, moonlit, warm, quiet, felt holy even when no one had yet invented the word. Love was no longer just coupling. It was watching, waiting, mourning, remembering, and each time there she was above us, the moon, keeping record of it all. She shone the same way for every tribe, every continent, every lover and every mother. The same moon saw the tears of a Neanderthal woman as her mate bled from a hunt, and the joy of an early Homo sapiens child taking its first unsteady steps. The moon became the first thing we all had in common, even when we didn't share tools, even when we didn't share gods, even when we feared each other, we looked up at her. And in that shared sky, perhaps, we found the earliest trace of empathy. When lovers were separated by migration, by rivers, by exile, they could still look up and know they're seeing this too. That thought so small, so soft may have changed us forever. To feel connection even when apart. To believe that someone was under the same moonlight, perhaps remembering you. Night was no longer just danger. It became intimacy, a place for quiet voices, slow touches, deep dreams. Moonlight revealed not just what we could kill, but what we could keep. Hands, stories, each other. And the moon, the ever-present, the witness, became more than light. She became a symbol of longing, of reunion, of permanence in the face of change. It was under the moon that we learned how to wait, to count the days of separation, to hope, to whisper to the stars, "Come back safe. Don't forget me." We etched these feelings into bone and breath long before we ever etched them into script. And the moon kept them. In time, we'd give her names Selene, Luna, Tsukuyomi, Mahina. We'd turn her into goddess and god, lover and hunter, mother and guardian. But before all of that, she was just there, watching two people learn how to hold each other without needing to fight. It's possible the first true human emotion was not fear, not hunger, not anger, but missing, and the moon made that emotion visible. Her cycles reminded us, everything that leaves returns, everything that fades brightens again. That's not just astronomy, that's faith. Perhaps the first human prayer was not to a sky god or a forest spirit, but to the moon. A whisper, bring them home, let them find me again. Let this love last through the dark. Even in death, especially in death, she stayed. Caves and burial grounds align with her light. Graves often faced west, toward where she sets. A signal, perhaps, that we believed the moon could guide souls, could comfort the ones left behind, could remind us that nothing is ever truly gone, only changed. Today, we still say it. We're under the same moon. Look up tonight. She's full again, just like when we met. That phrase crosses continents, cuts through wars, outlasts silence. It is the whisper that every soldier, every traveller, every broken heart has felt in their bones. The moon didn't teach us love, but she taught us how to see it. In distance, in return, in the reflection of light across a loved one's face. We were born wild, but we became human when we first looked at someone else, truly looked and saw more than survival. We saw feeling, and we saw it best in the quiet beneath the silver sky where lovers met, where lullabies drifted, where hope was born, lovers beneath the same moon. That's how it began. Not with thunder, but with touch. Not with conquest, but with care. Not with gods, but with gaze. And the moon, that glowing sentinel, will carry those first loves in her light forever. Navigators of the night, before the compass, before the map, before ink drew borders across paper, we had the sky, not as a backdrop, but as a living canvas, a guide, a whisperer of direction, a place where the future shimmered and the past could be retraced. And among all the celestial wanderers, one body remained closest, clearest, constant. The moon. She didn't rise randomly. She moved with purpose. And we barefoot, wide-eyed, full of wonder, we noticed. Somewhere along the edge of a continent, a hunter steps into the grass. His prey has gone. The trees are unfamiliar. His fire is a memory. But the moon is above, same curve, same glow, same arc from one horizon to the next. He doesn't panic. He follows her. Because even then, even in the fog of pre-language, we knew this. The moon leads you home. How do you find your way in a world with no signs, no roads, no cities, no stars named? You trust what repeats, what pulses, what returns. The moon did that. She rose in the east, waxed through the sky, waned into the west. Night after night her dance was predictable. And we began to remember, not just where she rose, but how high, how bright, what time. We linked her to tides, to hunting cycles, to the movement of animals, and eventually ourselves. Because humans weren't meant to stay in one place. We were migrators, nomads, explorers. The moon didn't just illuminate the path, she became the path. From the highlands of Ethiopia to the plains of Ukraine, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the forests of Siberia, people moved under moonlight. They followed river bends that shone silver on full moon nights. They crossed open fields only when she was bright enough to cast shadow. The moon was our first spotlight illuminating the way forward and the memory of where we had been. She became a kind of memory herself. When you looked at the moon, you didn't just see the sky, you saw the place you came from. You saw your mother pointing at her, your father teaching you when she was full, your sibling whispering a story about the dark spots on her face. The moon became a compass made of emotions. Because she wasn't just light, she was familiarity. She was home even when you were lost. And then we did something extraordinary. We started to compare her, night to night, season to season, hemisphere to hemisphere. We noticed the tilt of her angle, the path she traced in different times of year, the position where she rose. Suddenly, she wasn't just beautiful. She was a tool, the first celestial landmark in the first human maps. Before Polaris, before the constellations had stories, before stars were stitched into zodiac myths, there was the moon. Larger than all of them, more visible, more useful. We learned to track our direction by her position at dusk, to time our journeys by her fullness or absence. Moonlight became the signal, when to set out, when to stop, when to turn back. She wasn't a god yet, she was a guide, and that might have made her holier than anything else. Even oceans listened to her, even tides obeyed. So it wasn't long before we did too. Long before boats had sails, rafts drifted toward her light. Coastal tribes pushed out under crescent skies, knowing that if they followed the arc of her ascent, they'd find a familiar coastline. Even across water, even across fear, the moon remained above. Steady, unblinking, true. In the deserts she gave shade to thought. No shadows meant no surprise. The moon let you walk at night, barefoot and aware, cool and clear-minded. Caravans followed her. Families did too, and the further we spread across the earth, the more we brought her with us. In memory, in song, in direction. And then came something stranger, something deeper. We began to teach her paths. Parents pointed. She will rise over that mountain again. She sets near the river bend. Count 7 nights from now, she will be full. The moon was passed on, from generation to generation, as knowledge. And suddenly, the sky wasn't just beautiful, it was inherited. That knowledge became pattern. Pattern became expectation. And expectation became something extraordinary. Orientation. We knew where we were. We knew where we had been, and we believed for the first time that we could return. Not just physically, but emotionally. Because here's the secret. Navigation wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. To find your way home meant you had a home to return to. And the moon, rising like clockwork, told us, you still belong. Even if the forest looks different, even if the river has shifted, even if the faces have changed, the moon remains. So can you. That belief that memory can anchor you, that you can orient yourself through time and space, was the first spark of civilization. And even now, as satellites chart the heavens, as apps guide our feet, as cities burn brighter than the stars, we still look up at her when we're lost. Not for coordinates, for comfort and matter, because the moon still knows the way. She always has. Whether across tundra or ocean, across millennia or heartbreak, across deserts or data she leads. She whispers, "This is the way. You have seen me before. You will see me again. Keep going." We became human when we started to remember the sky, and the moon, patient and precise, became our first map, our first direction, our first signpost in the stars. Not just where to go, but who we were as we moved through the dark. Stone, bone, and moonlight. We were no longer just looking at the moon. We were building for her, carving for her, aligning our world to hers. Somewhere in deep time, the human gaze turned from mere observation to architecture, from campfires and dreams to circles of stone and memory. Because at some point, we stopped seeing the moon as only light, we saw her as divine, and we began to raise monuments in her honor. Not with blueprints, not with math, but with something even older wonder. The first temples weren't buildings, they were moments made solid. Rituals captured in wood and stone, aligned to the sky so time itself could pass through them like breath through a flute. We planted bones in the ground, we stacked boulders in rings, not for shelter, but for meaning, and always, always, we faced the moon. Nabta Playa. Before Stonehenge, before pyramids. In the sands of southern Egypt, where rain once fell and nomads gathered beside a seasonal lake, a circle of stones was raised. Not randomly, not casually. Aligned perfectly to mark the rising of the summer solstice moon. 7,000 years ago. These people had no metal, no wheel, no written language, but they knew the moon, knew her cycles, knew her light, knew that when she reached a certain place in the sky, the rains would come. Nabta Playa wasn't just a calendar. It was a conversation between earth and sky, between past and present, between bone and breath. The stones, some standing, some buried, formed a celestial message etched into the desert floor. A message only visible when you knew how to look upward, and they weren't alone. Thousands of years later, on a different continent in a colder land, another circle rose from the soil. Massive stones hauled from distant quarries erected by hands without cranes or pulleys. Stonehenge. Often thought of as a solar site, but listen carefully. Some of those stones track the moon. Lunar standstills. The extreme limits of the moon's rise and set. Moments so rare they happen only every 18.6 years. Someone noticed. Someone measured. Someone cared enough to build for it. Stonehenge wasn't just a temple. It was a clock made of reverence. These were not engineers. They were witnesses. And what they built wasn't just functional. It was spiritual orientation, so that each generation would know the moon matters. She returns, she rules, she remembers. Farther east, buried under centuries of soil, a mountain of megaliths waited to be revealed. Göbekli Tepe. In present-day Turkey, the world's oldest known monumental site, 12,000 years old. Older than pottery, older than the wheel, older than agriculture. Before farming, before domesticated animals. We built this, not to survive, but to worship. T-shaped pillars carved with lions, vultures, serpents, symbols not of tools, but of belief. Archaeologists argue over what it means. A temple? A community centre? A gathering place for rituals? But one theory whispers louder than the rest. It's a line to the moon. Why would hunter-gatherers haul stones taller than themselves, carve symbols they couldn't explain in words, and bury it all again, unless it mattered? Unless they looked up at night, saw her silver arc drawn across the sky, and felt something they couldn't contain in story alone? Unless they believed the moon could hear them? We think of architecture as bricks and beams, but the earliest architecture was made of ore, and the moon was its muse. We didn't just use stone, we used bone. The bones of deer and bear, the skulls of our ancestors, buried beneath doorways aligned with moonlight, to mark the night of return, to honour the dead, to map time in memory and marrow. There are sites in France's Paleolithic caves where the moon is painted as a glowing orb hovering over animals. Carvings of crescent shapes, dots that mark her phases. We etched her into stone before we etched her into myth, because she wasn't just above us, she was within us. The moon taught us structure, she gave us rhythm, she gave us time, and we repaid her in alignment. Stones that captured her rising, passages that filled with light only once a year, caves that glowed when she reached her zenith. And when that happened, when the moonlight pierced the darkness just right, we gasped. We wept. Because it felt like she saw us. These places weren't just for science, they were for gathering, for sitting together beneath the stars to ask the same question. Why? Why does she change? Why does she vanish? Why does she return? And in trying to answer and building these sacred geometries, we were shaping not just stone but mind. These sites were the first cathedrals, but their gods had no faces, only phases, and the prayers spoken within them had no words, only ritual gesture, silence. We didn't always understand what we built, but we understood why. Because something that constant, that luminous, that patient had to mean something, had to be more than light. She was the first teacher of cycles of return, of eternity made visible. And when we saw that we built to hold it, to keep a part of her etched into the earth forever, stone, bone, moonlight, the trinity of early faith, the foundation of all future temples, not made for comfort, made for wonder, the moon in our DNA, the moon never leaves us. Even when she hides behind clouds, even when she vanishes from the sky, even when we stop looking, she's there, not just above, within. Her pull, subtle, ancient, absolute, is not limited to tides or the turning of seasons. She moves in us, in the deepest parts, where language has no voice, where memory is written in molecules, She is in our blood, our bones, our brains, and maybe in our dreams. Science would call it coincidence, a remnant of evolution, an echo of a more primitive world. But what if it's more? What if the moon didn't just shape our stories, but shaped us? Every creature on Earth shaped by rhythm. Light and dark, hot and cold, summer and winter. But one rhythm repeats more softly than the rest, a slower, quieter drumbeat. Lunar, 29.5 days, a cycle of light and absence. From new to full to new again. Not loud like the sun, not frantic like the wind, just steady. And we, fragile, fire-loving beings, built our biology around her glow. Start with the mind. Tucked deep in the brain is a cluster of neurons no bigger than a grain of rice. The suprachiasmatic nucleus. The body's master clock. It sets your sleep, your hunger, your mood. And though it listens mostly to the sun, there are whispers in its ear from the moon. People sleep differently under a full moon. This is not poetry, this is data. In sleep labs across the world, researchers tracked brainwaves, melatonin levels, eye movements, and night after night the pattern emerged. Under a full moon we fall asleep slower, sleep less deeply, wake more often. Even when the light is blocked, even when we don't see her, the moon knows, and our bodies remember. Why? Because long before curtains, before clocks, before rooftops, the moon was our nighttime companion. She lit the hunt, she revealed the eyes in the dark, she watched over birth and death with the same quiet grace. And the body learned to listen, to rise when she was bright, to retreat when she waned, to sync with the sky. Some researchers call it the circalunar rhythm, less known than the circadian clock, but just as real. Menstrual cycles follow it. So do the spawning of fish, the nesting of birds, the mating calls of frogs. Across species, across continents, across time, the moon whispers, now, and life responds. Among humans, it begins with blood. 28 days, on average. A rhythm older than agriculture, older than writing. Women once bled together in huts beneath the moonlight, marking time not with calendars but with their bodies. The moon was not just light. She was sister. She was midwife. She was the unseen force that tethered life to time. Even now, in our cities of glass and screen, some bodies still follow her. And even those who don't, they carry the memory. In hormones, in cells, in whispers passed down through womb and word. But it's not only women. All of us, regardless of sex or gender, feel her. In our mood, our energy, our tides of emotion. Hospitals report more births during full moons. Emergency rooms grow louder. Sleep becomes elusive. Dreams become strange. Coincidence? Or biology? Or perhaps a truth that science has only begun to measure? The moon doesn't just pull oceans, she pulls us. And not with force, but with reminder of cycles, of returns, of what came before. Ask a farmer. They will tell you when to plant. Ask a fisher. They will tell you when the sea listens best. Ask an elder. They will tell you when dreams mean more. All trace their wisdom to the moon. Not superstition, observation. Patterns remembered not in textbooks, but in skin. And the strangest part? Even when we don't believe, our bodies still do. In prisons, in cities, in apartment blocks that never see moonlight, people sleep differently. People bleed differently. People dream differently. Because the moon is not a symbol. She is biological inheritance. Imagine this. A child is born under a waxing crescent. She cries less than most. She sleeps in rhythm with the tide. She grows up never watching the sky but always sensing its presence. When she loves, it's in phases. When she mourns, she vanishes. and when she writes, her sentences follow the arc of moonlight from new to full and back again. That child is not fiction. She is you, she is me. She is all of us still listening to a satellite we forgot we needed. The moon is not in our minds, she is in our molecules. The way our pupils widen, the way our hair grows, the way we feel the edge of change before it arrives. Some call it sensitivity, others call it madness. But maybe it's just a species remembering its first teacher, the one who watched us crawl from the forest, the one who lit our first stories, the one who held time before clocks dared try. The moon is not a relic. She's a genetic companion, a code etched in the spaces between genes, a rhythm no surgeon can cut out, no algorithm can predict. She's the beat behind breath, the logic behind longing, the silence behind song. And she lives inside us still. Long after we've left the caves, long after we've walked on her surface, long after we've forgotten to look up. She remains, not just above, but within, the moon in our dreams, the moon in our cycles, the moon in our DNA, the myths that crossed continents long before maps, before borders, before names for oceans and peaks we told stories. And somehow, those stories echo one another across vast continents, across languages that never met. Different people, different lands, but always the same moon. She rose above Africa's red dust and Asia's mountain spines. She floated above icy tundras and Pacific archipelagos. She watched over jungles and deserts, volcanoes and salt plains. And wherever we looked, we saw her. Her changing face, her gentle light, her patient silence. She was constant. So we gave her a name. Or 1,000. But beneath those names lived a deeper truth. We were all remembering the same thing. In the beginning, the stories were whispers, carried in fire smoke, drawn in ochre on cave walls, passed from mother to daughter, elder to child. The moon was a woman, a man, a rabbit, a mirror, a drumbeat, a mother's breath, but always a mystery worth naming. In Africa, the San people told of a selfish moon who refused to share her light, so the hair struck her, leaving her face marked forever. A tale of pride, of violence, of consequence, but also of cycles. She dies. She returns. She always comes back. In ancient China, they told of Chang'e, the moon goddess who drank the elixir of immortality and floated upward, leaving her husband behind. Now she waits, forever alone, watched by a jade rabbit pounding the elixir on the moon's surface. A tale of sacrifice, of love, of longing, of someone who rose but could never return. Across the Pacific, in Polynesia, they spoke of Hina the moon maiden who escaped to the sky to flee earthly burdens. They say she guides the tides. They say she weeps for the ocean. They say she still watches the canoes that cross her reflection. A tale of freedom, of escape, of watching from afar. The Inuit of the Arctic told a darker story, of a brother who chased his sister, of Aningan the moon man pursuing Melina the sun woman across the sky after a terrible crime. As he grows thinner, he forgets to eat, then vanishes, then returns. A myth of pursuit and guilt, of waning strength and endless repetition. Even here, in the land of ice, the moon was haunted. In the Americas, stories shifted with geography. To the Cree, the moon was grandmother calm and wise, lighting the path for lost souls. To the Aztec, the moon was Coyolxauhqui, dismembered in battle, her pieces thrown into the sky to glow in shame beneath her victorious brother, the sun. To the Cherokee, the moon was held aloft by a great spirit, her phases explained by a greedy dog who tried to eat her piece by piece until she returned anew. One continent, dozens of tribes, dozens of myths, but always a moon who died and returned. How? How did peoples divided by oceans carry such similar tales? How did the moon become a wounded woman in one land, a fleeing goddess in another, a consumed soul, a sister, a lover, a mother? Perhaps it was coincidence. Or perhaps we carried these myths in the only vessel that crossed every border, the human body. Because no matter where we lived, we bled, we birthed, we watched our elders die and prayed they rose again. We hunted by moonlight. We made love under her glow. We sang lullabies to sleeping children beneath her silver face. And from these shared rituals came shared metaphors. To be human was to wonder, to explain the unknown with story. And so, the moon became a canvas, a blank space to hold our fears, our loves, our questions. We painted her with whatever brush we had: blood, shadow, bone, hope. The moon was never just an object. She was a participant. She marked our time. She brightened our darkest nights. She listened to our prayers without ever answering. She became the first mirror, and in every corner of the earth, when we looked up, we saw ourselves in her. What's more incredible than shared myth is shared meaning, because in every myth, the moon leaves and returns, changes shape, watches us silently, guides birth, death, and love. These patterns weren't random. They were reflections of something deeper, of how we change, how we vanish and return, how we ache to be seen. Even now, when we live beneath electric skies, when we hold the moon in phone cameras instead of prayers, we still whisper her stories. We still gather on rooftops during eclipses, still tell our children to make wishes on the full moon, still write poems about her glowing loneliness. The myths never died. They mutated. They travelled. They crossed ice bridges and stormy seas in the mouths of sailors, shamans, mothers, and madmen. They were sung, carved, whispered. They were remembered by the heart when the tongue forgot. Ask an elder in Siberia. Ask a shepherd in Morocco. Ask a fisherman in Samoa. They may not use the same words, but they'll all tell you the moon watches, the moon changes, the moon returns. Because even when cultures forgot how to speak to one another, they still spoke to the sky. And the sky always replied. The moon is the last shared myth. Not bound to any temple, not owned by any empire, a global memory, a celestial story that needed no translation. She belonged to no one, which meant she belonged to everyone. And maybe that's the lesson. That before we divided ourselves by nation, name, or colour, we shared a story. A silver one, hung in the heavens, told by shadows. A myth that crossed continents on the back of wonder. When we reached for her, we had always stared at her. From the mouths of caves, from the rooftops of mud huts, from stone circles aligned with her glow, we had watched. We had named her, prayed to her, bled with her, buried our dead under her silver light. The moon was never just a light in the sky. She was presence, she was mystery, she was dream. And then, one day, we decided that dream was no longer enough. It began with fire. Not the kind that warmed our ancestors' caves, but the kind that cracked the heavens. In laboratories and deserts, on drafting tables and in bunkers, the descendants of those cave-bound storytellers built engines of fury. Rockets, satellites, machines that roared like the gods we used to believe lived up there. We no longer whispered to the moon. We aimed for her. Why? Why not leave her where she had always been a myth, a muse, a mother in the sky? Because we are a species that asks. We are the ones who light fire, then stare into it. The ones who build spears, then wonder where the prey came from. We are curiosity turned flesh. And the moon? She was the oldest question we ever had. The 20th century arrived like a storm. War, industry, wires and wheels, atoms split and minds racing. The world shrank. The sky grew closer, and beneath the noise of nations, a quiet voice still hummed. What if we could touch her? First we reached with radios, then with robotic arms, then, finally, with feet. 1969. A year that once sounded like the future, now a page in a textbook. But for those watching, it was nothing less than the moment myth became mission. They gathered around flickering screens, black and white ghosts broadcast from the void, and then a footprint. Neil Armstrong's words echoed across decades. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. But something older whispered underneath his voice. We're home. Because in that step, we weren't just conquering the moon. We were returning to a place our dreams had lived for millennia, from firelit tales to frozen footprints. A circle closed in dust and silence. The astronauts didn't find gods or goddesses. They found regolith, fine lunar soil untouched for billions of years, no jade rabbit, no moon maiden, just endless grey, and yet something sacred. Because even in her emptiness, the moon gave us something Earth never had: perspective. From her desolate surface, the Earth looked small, blue, fragile, whole. Borders vanished, conflicts dissolved. It was the first time we saw ourselves as one species. Not nations, not tribes, just humans, children of a single moon. The moon became more than a place. She became proof that we could imagine the impossible, then build it. That wonder could become engineering, that awe could become algorithm. She was the final exam for 100,000 years of dreaming. And we passed. But success comes with forgetting. After Apollo, we stopped looking up. The moon became conquered, a relic, a flag planted. Not a mystery, not a mother. Just coordinates and mineral maps. We mined her with data instead of wonder. And in doing so, something ancient dimmed. Because we forgot. We didn't go to the moon with machines alone. We went with stories, with every grandmother who once told her granddaughter that the moon was watching, with every ancestor who carved her into bone, with every voice that whispered love beneath her glow. We went to the moon on a bridge made of myth. Now the world turns again. Talk of return, talk of colonization, talk of mining and tourism and Mars. We dream again, but differently. Less wonder, more profit, less reverence, more race. And yet the moon waits, unchanged, unaffected, still turning her face in phases, still keeping time with tides and wombs, still watching us as she always did. Maybe she doesn't need us, but we still need her, not as real estate, not as a launch pad, but as the thing that reminded us who we were before we had names for anything. We once asked, what is she? Then, can we reach her? Now maybe it's time to ask, can we return with humility? Because the moon isn't just a goal, she's a memory of who we were when we first looked up, of what it meant to be small and curious and full of questions, and perhaps what it still means to be human. As we stand again on the edge of stars, may we remember, we are not just explorers, we are not just engineers, we are not just conquerors. We are the species who told stories to the moon before we ever touched her. Let us go back not to own, but to honour. Let our second steps be wiser than the first. Because the moon is not just up there. She is in our past, our bones, our blood, our songs. She is destiny. Not in the way rockets dream, but in the way firelight once flickered on the faces of children who asked why she changed shape. We reached for her, and we touched her. But maybe now it's time to listen. Epilogue. Look up tonight. The same moon watches us still. You are the descendant of those who stared at the sky, The moon hasn't changed, but we have, and in that light you're ancient again. Step outside. Just for a moment. No phone, no agenda, no noise but the wind, no light but the sky. And look up. There she is. The same moon. Not a symbol, not a myth, not a destination. Just there. Quiet, steady, watching. As she always has. That light falling across your cheek, it's not just reflected sunlight. It's a whisper. It's a memory. It's the soft glow of 10,000 generations gazing upward and wondering. That moon has seen things. She's seen your ancestors crawl from the grasslands and huddle in the dark, eyes wide with terror and wonder. She's seen the first fires lit to keep away the teeth in the night. She's seen hands draw her face on cave walls no light has touched in 40,000 years. She's seen the moment when someone first said, "What is that?" and meant it. She's heard lullabies from 1,000 tongues. She's lit the path of migrations that took lifetimes. She's been carved into bone tools, painted on skin, worshipped, feared, loved. And through it all, she never blinked. Never changed her rhythm, never missed a step. The same orbit, the same glow. Only we changed. Once she was the map, the myth, the muse. Now she's often ignored. Blurred behind neon haze. Forgotten between headlines. Reduced to a backdrop for photographs that say nothing. We filled our skies with satellites and screens and forgot to look. We built taller buildings but let our vision shrink. We reached her surface but lost the story. And still she waits. She does not need us. But she remembers us, because you, reading this now, you are not new. You're not the end of the story. You're not separate from those firelit nights or those stone-carved hands. You're their descendant. You are the living memory of every single soul who ever looked at the moon and asked why. That ache to understand it lives in you. That a weight hums beneath your skin. That need to find meaning in light, that's your inheritance. You're not a modern human cut off from the past. You're a branch on a tree older than the mountains. You carry the DNA of people who cried to the moon, danced beneath her, sang to her, died under her light and gave birth in her shadow. You are, in this moment, ancient again. So what now? What do we do with this memory that doesn't feel like memory? We remember. We look up, not because the moon demands it, but because the act itself is a rebellion. A small, sacred defiance in a world drowning in distraction. To look up tonight is to step back into the great story. To join the unbroken chain of humans who saw more than a rock in the sky. Who saw a mirror, a companion, a clock, a goddess, a ghost. And maybe they were right. Maybe she is all those things. Maybe the moon is not what we measure, but what measures us. She's measured our time, our seasons, our growth, our forgetting, our returning. She watched when we were small. She watched when we were cruel. She watched when we loved. She watched when we reached for her with machines and myths. And now she watches you, sitting here, breathing, reading, remembering. Look up tonight, not for knowledge, but for belonging. Because you do belong not to the chaos of modern life, but to something deeper. You belong to the sky, to the story, to the rhythm. And the moon, with her slow and faithful turning, is still telling it. Not in words, but in light, in shadow, in the quiet reminder that you are not alone. So, tonight, step outside. Feel the cool air. Let the noise slip away. Raise your eyes. She'll be waiting. And when you see her, really see her, you'll know. You're not just looking at the moon. You're looking into the oldest part of yourself. The part that still remembers the night sky before names, before clocks, before gods and borders and buildings. The part that still wonders. the part that still belongs. Look up tonight, and in that silver light you are ancient again.